Hi, and welcome to episode 49 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the host at tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First of all, let's look at our Toke Signals Bud Pick of the Week. Some of you have been following with me through the life cycle of this Frankenstein plant. She's a beautiful indica, and she's now 17 days into flower. You can see the pretty results of that on our Bud Pick of the Week picture. Let's do the news now, shall we? A very sad story from Iowa this week, where a dying cancer patient and his wife and his son were convicted of growing marijuana for his medicine. The unthinkable happened. Benton McKenzie, 48, faces a probable prison sentence after his Wednesday conviction on drug charges, which he views as a death sentence. I knew that's what they were going to do, McKenzie said as his wife pushed him in a wheelchair, leaving the courthouse. The unbelievable guilty verdict on 4 felony drug charges was delivered by Scott County jurors. McKenzie's wife and son were also convicted alongside him. McKenzie said he used the plants to extract cannabis oil to treat a painful tumor on his buttock caused by angiosarcoma, a rare aggressive form of cancer. The tumor has grown to the size of a grapefruit. The case has grown national attention to the barbarity of arresting cancer patients for treating themselves with cannabis. This year, Iowa legislators passed one of those CBD-only bills that are narrowly crafted to allow parents with epileptic children to use cannabis oil as a treatment, but that won't help the McKenzies. The change in law benefits only a small group of Iowans with the most organized lobbying efforts, the Des Moines Register editorial board wrote over the weekend. Other sick Iowans should have legal access to marijuana extracts too. These include people with painful and debilitating conditions like cancer, spinal cord injuries, and severe arthritis, who may benefit from the drug, the board wrote. But if these people obtain cannabis oil, they will still be considered criminals in this state. Judge Henry Latham barred McKenzie's defense attorneys from even mentioning that he used marijuana out of medical necessity, because Iowa law does not allow the use of cannabis to treat his condition. That ruling infuriated many Iowans who have stood up to support McKenzie since his arrest. A Free Benton McKenzie Facebook page had 2,386 likes by midday on Thursday. McKenzie said the judge's ruling sealed his fate with jurors who might have been more sympathetic had they known about his medical condition. I'm still flabbergasted about how a judge can court order me not to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, McKenzie said outside the courthouse after the verdict. It's an abomination of justice. McKenzie is scheduled to be sentenced on August 28th. Because of 2 earlier felony drug convictions in 2000 and 2011, he could be labeled a habitual offender. That would carry a 3-year mandatory minimum sentence, although he could get probation, according to Scott County Attorney Mike Walton. Walton claimed his office would take McKenzie's condition into account when recommending a sentence to prosecutors, but he also said they'd take his past crimes into consideration. Walton said McKenzie knew he was breaking the law by growing marijuana. The laws are not written in Scott County, Walton scoffed. I don't write the laws. I'm supposed to enforce them. And if people want the law to change, the law needs to change at the State House for everybody, not at the courthouse on a case-by-case basis. State Senator Joel Bolcom, a Democrat from Iowa City, who has previously introduced legislation to allow medical marijuana in Iowa, said McKenzie's legal battles show Iowans they have more work to do to change the laws. He called the prosecution of McKenzie and his family a waste of taxpayer money. This verdict really shows that we have work to do, Bolcom said on Wednesday. There are many Iowans, I'm guessing, that are illegally using cannabis to address their medical conditions who could find themselves in the same predicament as Mr. McKenzie for simply trying to improve their quality of life and treat a debilitating condition. McKenzie and his wife, Loretta, 43, had previously been prosecuted for growing marijuana used for his treatment. In 2011, they both pleaded guilty in Scott County to drug charges and were put on probation. Benton also had a drug conviction back in 2000 for growing psilocybin mushrooms. He had been diagnosed with angiosarcoma in 2011, his wife said, and chose to treat himself with cannabis oil and by drinking fresh juice from the marijuana plants instead of seeking chemotherapy, which he was worried would damage his heart. The tumor, which had been the size of a golf ball, was reduced to a bump within 2 months after he started treating it with cannabis, McKenzie said. He continued using the oil after his June 2013 arrest, but the oil is only available sporadically, and the tumor is now the size of a grapefruit. McKenzie and his wife and son live with his parents in Eldridge, just north of Davenport, Iowa. He admits he grew marijuana in a trailer and RV on the property. Law enforcement found 71 plants when they raided the place last year. Benton and Loretta were slapped with felony drug charges. Their son, Cody, 22, was charged with possession of a controlled substance and drug paraphernalia. They were not allowed to hear enough information, Loretta said of the jurors who convicted her, her husband, and her son. It was definitely a very controlled environment. Ben McKenzie's elderly parents, both in their 70s, were also charged with felonies for allowing the marijuana to be grown on their property. They go on trial later this month. To me, it's a shame that we're not seeing his situation as a research opportunity to learn on an actual human being, said Dr. Charles Goldman, a surgical oncologist at Mercy Medical Center in Des Moines. The fact of the matter is he's alive 4 years after his diagnosis, and he was not treated with any chemotherapy. In Massachusetts, much better news this week, where the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that the smell of marijuana cannot justify a search of your car. Police officers in Massachusetts can no longer rely solely on the odor of unburnt marijuana as a probable cause to justify a vehicle search. The state's Supreme Judicial Court unanimously ruled on Wednesday, even if the smell is strong or very strong, the justices said. The court had already ruled in the Commonwealth v. Cruz decision back in 2011 that the smell of burnt marijuana was not in itself sufficient evidence to stop pedestrians or to search vehicles. The court said in that ruling that it would be legally inconsistent to allow the cops to make warrantless searches after they smell burned marijuana when citizens had decided through a statewide referendum that law enforcement should focus their attention elsewhere. The court on Wednesday said it is now extending that same reasoning to cases where the owner has not yet started smoking the marijuana. The justices acknowledged that cannabis has a pungent aroma, but they said that odor by itself does not allow police to determine whether a person has more than an ounce on them. You see, possession of an ounce or less of marijuana is not a crime in Massachusetts, where voters chose to decriminalize pot back in 2008. The 2008 initiative decriminalized possession of 1 ounce or less of marijuana under state law and accordingly removed police authority to arrest individuals for civil violations, Justice Barbara Link wrote for the unanimous court. We have held that the odor of burnt marijuana cannot support probable cause to search a vehicle without a warrant. Now we hold that such odor of unburnt marijuana standing alone does not provide probable cause to search an automobile, Link wrote. In sum, we are not confident, at least on this record, that a human nose can discern reliably the presence of a criminal amount of marijuana as distinct from an amount subject only to a civil fine, the justices wrote. The court established a new ruling on the odor of unburnt marijuana in the case of Matthew W. Overmeyer. He got arrested in Pittsfield while the cops were investigating a car wreck. Responding officers noticed that Overmeyer carried a very strong odor of unburnt marijuana. Police found a bag of weed in the glove box of Overmeyer's car, and then they found more in his backpack. They charged him with possession of marijuana with intent to distribute. The court ruled police could not use the smell alone to arrest Overmeyer, but might have had other legally approved reasons for searching his vehicle. They ordered the case back to district court for more proceedings to decide if the presence of marijuana in the glove box of the car justified a more extensive search of the backpack. The court rejected the argument from police that law enforcement can use the smell of marijuana to stop someone because possession of marijuana is still illegal under federal law. The fact that such conduct is technically subject to a federal prohibition does not provide an independent justification for a warrantless search, Link wrote. Where the 2008 initiative decriminalized possession of 1 ounce or less of marijuana under state law and accordingly removed police authority to arrest individuals for civil violations, it also must be read as curtailing police authority to enforce the federal prohibition of possession of small amounts of marijuana. More good news from Colorado this week, where tourists are absolutely loving legal marijuana in those ski resort towns. Tourists are responsible for up to 90% of recreational marijuana sales in some Colorado ski resort towns, according to a new analysis from the state. Those visitors are infusing tens of millions of dollars into the mile-high marijuana economy. This study was prepared for state marijuana regulators by the Marijuana Policy Group. That's a collaboration between private consultants and the University of Colorado Boulder Business Research Division. It says that about 9% of Colorado residents are using cannabis at least once per month. According to the study, which was released on Wednesday, 22% of users consume about 70% of the marijuana sold in Colorado. The study defines a heavy marijuana user as someone consuming a gram or more a day, at least 21 days monthly. Colorado residents will consume about 121.4 metric tons of weed each year, while tourists will buy nearly 9 metric tons, according to this study. Earlier this year, state tax officials estimated the market at just 91 metric tons, and a separate study released last fall estimated it at just 64 metric tons. This study, in other words, is estimating the market at almost twice the level it was being estimated last year. There are 1 million grams in a metric ton. According to the study, the average joint contains about half a gram. Yeah, these guys must roll pinners. A significant amount of the cannabis sold in Colorado is in either cannabis-infused edibles or hash oil, which contains concentrated THC. This analysis suggests that the Colorado marijuana market is larger than previously thought, the study says. When combined, total resident and visitor demand is estimated to be approximately 130.3 metric tons in 2014. This is a substantially higher value than reported in previous estimates, the study dryly notes. So far this fiscal year, Colorado has collected $34.8 million in marijuana taxes and fees. Retail recreational marijuana sales began in Colorado on January 1st. According to the study, recreational and medical marijuana stores will probably sell only about 77 metric tons of weed this year, with the rest sold illegally. Only a small amount is grown by people for their own use, according to the study. Taxes on medical marijuana are significantly lower in Colorado than on recreational weed, and residents with a qualifying medical condition can get on the state's red card registry for $15, but tourists can't get those cards. The potential demand for marijuana by out-of-state visitors could represent a significant portion of total retail demand, according to the study. While many Colorado residents have medical marijuana cards, allowing them to purchase at a lower tax rate and at a greater number of locations, out-of-state visitors must purchase from retail marijuana vendors exclusively. Preliminary revenue and sales data from the Department of Revenue indicate that for some counties, about 90% of all retail sales of marijuana are likely to be from out-of-state visitors, according to the study. Colorado's ski resorts have been a bit skittish about the marijuana boom, taking pains to remind both residents and tourists that smoking pot in public is still illegal. It's also illegal to use marijuana on federal land, and the U.S. Forest Service happens to own most of the land in the state's ski areas. In the United States this week, a new poll shows that young adults favor marijuana legalization. This Reason Root study and survey of 2,000 Americans between the ages of 18 and 29 finds that 57% of this demographic, which is known as the millennials, believe the government should allow the recreational use of marijuana. Just 39% were opposed. Even more impressively, more than 8 of every 10 millennials, 83%, think that marijuana users should either face no penalties, just be fined, or have to attend rehabilitation. Only 14% said that marijuana users should go to jail. The Reason Root report finds 74% of millennials say government has a responsibility to guarantee every citizen has a place to sleep and enough to eat. 71% favor raising the federal minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, and 69% said it is the government's responsibility to provide everyone with health care insurance. Millennials generally oppose sending people to prison for other drugs besides marijuana as well. 68% said ecstasy users should either face no penalties, be fined, or have to attend rehab, with just 28% saying they should go to jail. Of those registered to vote, 76% of millennials said they plan to vote in the 2014 midterm elections. In New York this week, the Brooklyn DA said he won't pursue low-level marijuana arrests. The Brooklyn District Attorney's Office on Tuesday announced that it will immediately stop prosecuting most low-level marijuana cases. This policy change comes after months of resistance from the New York Police Department. This new policy is a reasonable response to the thousands of low-level marijuana arrests that weigh down the criminal justice system, require significant resources that could be redirected to more serious crimes, and take an unnecessary toll on offenders, DA Kenneth P. Thompson said in a release. Those caught with under 25 grams of pot will have their cases dismissed prior to arraignment, which has been happening more and more often anyway. Given that these cases are ultimately and predictably dismissed, the burdens that they pose on the system and on the individual are difficult to justify. We are pouring money into an endeavor that produces no public safety benefit, DA Thompson said. The change was proposed in a confidential memo back in April, but was delayed as police officials resisted the efforts of prosecutors to convince them to enter the 21st century. There are still several exceptions to the new policy described in a Tuesday memo. Only those with no criminal records qualify, and when people are caught smoking pot in public, especially around children, those cases won't be automatically thrown out. The new policy won't apply to 16 and 17-year-olds either. Instead of being let go, those poor kids will be sent to a drug program for weed. Nevertheless, Thompson said in the memo that the idea is to keep nonviolent people, and especially young people of color, out of the criminal justice system. Thompson pointed out that having an open case can lead to difficulty finding employment, housing, and school for defendants. This policy does not express approval for the use of marijuana and should not be interpreted as such, Thompson said. Mayor Bill de Blasio, a fellow Democrat of Thompson's, had criticized police policies of marijuana enforcement. But in the negotiations, de Blasio seemed to bow to Police Commissioner William J. Bill Bratton, who definitely believes in making plenty of low-level pot busts. The de Blasio administration continues the Big Apple's run as the marijuana arrest capital of the world, as it arrests more marijuana users than the Giuliani administration and slightly more than the final year of Mayor Bloomberg's tenure. Police officials whine that this new policy puts them in a difficult position, since the enforcement rules of Brooklyn will differ from that of New York City's other 4 boroughs. Commissioner Bratton claimed that he understood DA Thompson had the prerogative to decline to prosecute any criminal offense in Brooklyn, but went on to say that the policy change wouldn't make any difference to the cops under his command and will, quote, not result in any changes. However, in order to be effective, our police officers must enforce the laws of the state of New York uniformly throughout all 5 boroughs of the city, Bratton claimed. Accordingly, the Kings County policy change will not result in any changes in the policies and procedures of the NYPD. Marijuana arrests have skyrocketed in the Big Apple over the past 15 years, in part because of the increase in stop and frisk encounters, where the cops make people empty their pockets and then often bust them for public display of their weed, thus getting around New York's decrim law passed back in the 70s. Police, of course, deny that ever happens. Nevertheless, the cops were reminded in September 2011 that they weren't supposed to be tricking people into getting their pot out. Former Mayor Michael Bloomberg announced last year that most low-level pot arrests would get court appearance tickets instead of being booked and waiting for arraignment. In the year ending June 30th, Brooklyn had 8,150 cases where minor marijuana possession was the top charge, according to Tuesday's memo. Pot arrests have dropped during the first 6 months of 2014 compared to the same period last year. Police initially got their backs up about the change when they thought that it was a blanket policy, but calmed down a little when they realized that there would be a case-by-case review, according to one person involved in the negotiations. The cops pushed to preserve their ability to make cases on someone smoking or holding lit marijuana, which they claimed is a public safety issue. The DA's office agreed to add language in its new policy that it may prosecute defendants charged with smoking marijuana in public. People arrested for marijuana possession in Brooklyn will still be taken to the precinct station under the new policy, then be sent to central booking, where they'd spend the night in a holding cell awaiting the next day's court arraignment. The cops would also have the option of giving offenders a desk appearance ticket for court on a given day. But why do you bet that won't happen if they don't like your looks? If the DA decides not to prosecute and the person is in the system, the office will tell the police to set that person free. If that person has received a desk appearance ticket and the DA decides not to prosecute, the office will send a letter informing the person that they won't be prosecuted and there's no need to appear in court. The offender's fingerprints will then be destroyed in both instances. The language of the memorandum seems to clearly reflect the political battle for power that occurred in the negotiations. In one particularly syrupy passage, the DA's office plays obsequious homage to the police department. Quote, "The policy does not undermine the authority of the police to enforce the law," the memo reads. "This office respects the officers of the New York City Police Department. We recognize that the possession of marijuana is illegal in this state, and that the police, when acting in a constitutional manner, have authority to arrest offenders who break the law," the memo says, in a section that sounds as if it came straight from NYPD headquarters. In Washington State this week, we saw a historic day, the first day of legal marijuana sales, and we also saw high prices and long lines. 20 months after Washington's voters approved limited marijuana legalization measure Initiative 502, the first licensed recreational cannabis stores in the state opened on Tuesday to long lines. With only 4 shops open statewide out of 24 that received licenses on Monday, prices were high and competition was non-existent. Thomas Snyder of Richland, Washington, went to Altitude in Prosser at 9 a.m. for Tuesday's grand opening. "I didn't actually go inside," Snyder told Hemp News on Wednesday. "I decided we couldn't afford 2 grams at $30 each. So I let my wife go in while I watched the kids in the car." The place was very professional, Snyder told us. The line was maybe an hour and a half wait when we got there, an hour after they opened. Twice, while I was waiting, the staff came outside and handed out bottled water and soda. But inquiring minds want to know, Thomas, was the marijuana any good? "Not too bad at all," Snyder told me of the weed's quality. "It could have used a longer cure, but that's what happens when it's all rushed to get to market." Altitude is only serving 300 customers a day until later this month, when the supply catches up with the demand, according to Snyder, who is an authorized medical marijuana patient. "I've had my authorization for almost 5 years now," Snyder told me. "I feel I can grow my own that is better quality and way cheaper too. But I attended yesterday's sale to be part of an historic event in our nation, the fruition of the nation's first from-scratch system regulating the production, processing, and retail sales of recreational cannabis. At Cannabis City in Seattle, there was an all-out media circus in the parking lot. Manager Amber McGowan said she expected to sell all 10 pounds in the store's inventory. "There's definitely a market out there that would rather go the safer route because a lot of people don't like going to their dealer," McGowan said. Cannabis City limited customers to 2-gram purchases on opening day. Most licensed growers don't expect their first harvest until late summer, and the tight supply meant high prices. Cannabis City sells its marijuana for $25 a gram, more than double the street price. Cannabis City owner James Lathrop said his crew served 700 customers in just 7 hours. And he said, "We still have plenty for tomorrow and the next day." They expected to stay open until 10 p.m., the closing time dictated by the state, on Tuesday. "We had a great day," he said. "We had a fantastic day." According to Lathrop, 2 of his customers had come from Spain that day just to get in on the opening day marijuana sales in Washington. Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes was among the customers at Cannabis City on Tuesday. The city's elected top prosecutor, a major backer of legalization, said he wanted to be one of the first customers. Holmes asked store employees which marijuana he should buy, and he ended up getting some 21.5% THC OG's Pearl. Holmes said he was buying the marijuana to use it. "Let's just leave it at that," he said. "It's important that we recognize we are in short supply," said Holmes, pointing out that Seattle has had only 1 marijuana store open so far. "And there's going to be other bumps in the road as we veer away from the failed war on drugs toward a regulated system." Another thing that is exerting an upward pressure on prices in Washington State is the fact that the marijuana is heavily taxed, 25% at every step of the process. That means the government collects 25% from growers, when they sell it to processors, again when processors sell it to retail stores, and again when stores sell it to end consumers. 40% of that tax revenue will go into Washington State's general fund. The rest will be wasted on prevention and treatment programs, a silly bone thrown to law enforcement by those who wrote the bill, supposedly to appeal to soccer moms and suburban families. Another of the state's 4 open pot stores, Top Shelf Cannabis in Bellingham, said, "We have not had a dead spot in the line for the entire day and may sell out if they keep coming like this." That was according to John Evich, an investor in the shop. According to Evich, Top Shelf had sold more than 2,000 grams on Tuesday. The shop expected to be open on Wednesday after putting another pound of weed into their store's state-required tracking system. Washington's Liquor Control Board was overwhelmed by nearly 7,000 applications to grow, process, or sell marijuana. Those license applications are now being reviewed at a slow pace by the board's 18 investigators. Only about a dozen growers were ready to harvest in time for the market's launch. More than 200 pesticides are allowed on state licensed marijuana under the Liquor Control Board's rules, a fact which greatly concerns everyone, of course, but especially medicinal cannabis patients, many of whom have compromised immune systems and/or liver functions. No home growing of marijuana is allowed under I-502, so consumers can't avoid the possibly pesticide-contaminated weed by growing their own. Medical marijuana patients are still allowed to cultivate up to 15 plants, but they almost lost that in this year's session of the Washington legislature, and another assault on the state's medical marijuana law is expected when lawmakers reconvene in January. In Colorado this week, a man offered President Obama a toke of marijuana. A bar patron in Denver on Tuesday night offered President Obama a joint, asking him, "Do you want to hit this?" The president laughed and smiled, but he didn't answer as he shook hands with other patrons. Matt Anton, the man who offered marijuana to the president, posted footage of Obama on his Instagram account with the caption, "Asked him if he wanted to hit a pot. He laughed. Hashtag legalize it. Hashtag inhaled." As the president's motorcade came into Denver from the airport, someone had held up a sign reading, "Free weed for Obama." After the president greeted a supporter outside the bar who was wearing a horse's head mask, a Time magazine reporter tweeted a photoshopped picture of Obama confronting an entire group of people with horse heads with the caption, "The moment POTUS remembered Maureen Dowd's warning about the Denver cookies." The president has expressed support for allowing legalization to proceed in Colorado and Washington. It's important for it to go forward because it's important for society not to have a situation in which a large portion of people have at one time or another broken the law and only a select few get punished, Obama told an interviewer back in January. "Middle-class kids don't get locked up for smoking pot, and poor kids do," the president said. "And African-American kids and Latino kids are more likely to be poor and less likely to have the resources and the support to avoid unduly harsh penalties." The president and his friends smoked so much marijuana as teens in Hawaii that they became known as the Choom Gang, choom being local slang for weed. He hasn't expressed an opinion on nationwide legalization, but Obama's Justice Department hasn't moved to quash legalization in Colorado and Washington. There's a must-read story that you really should check out before we go this week. It's an open letter from federal marijuana prisoner Chris Williams. It was a difficult letter for Chris to write, and I think that it's worth all of your time in checking it out. Chris is one of the heroes that is paying a huge price for serving patients in Montana. You'll want to check that out. Open letter from federal marijuana prisoner Chris Williams on tokesignals.com. Until next time, I hope you all choose to stay lifted. See you then.